about the education system falling apart in Tamil Nadu and elsewhere. We talk about the BBC attacks on Modi ji, things like that. But we haven't really looked at what are the deep causes for these kinds of attacks that come sporadically, that catch us unaware and unprepared to even give a response. So the Snakes in the Ganga essentially is a work that is in 4 parts. There are many new insights that we bring out in the book. It's a painstaking work where we show a lot of reference and background. We are not making ad hominem attacks. And so there is also a story behind the making of the Snakes in the Ganga as well. But I would start off saying that Western universalism, as we know it, has been coming to India, being applied on our social structure through different forms of Western theories that emanate from social sciences. Rajiv ji has talked about the 5 waves of Indology in the past. We're starting from Marxism and on to post-colonial studies and postmodernism, subaltern studies, things like that. Now, after these 5 waves of Indology that Rajiv ji has talked about, there is a 6th wave. And that sort of is the foundation upon which the Snakes in the Ganga essentially rests on. So this 6th wave of Indology, so to speak, is something called critical caste theory. Now, one might wonder why should we bother about these social theories, but very soon you will understand by the time I finish that it's very important to understand Western social sciences because they are being constantly applied to us and it destroys society, it becomes a breaking India force, and we are always reacting to these forces. I think 12 or 13 years ago, Rajiv ji wrote the first book, Breaking India. It is still relevant. We see the missionary and the church still at play. Aravindan Neelakantan was, the co-author then. And Breaking India 2.0, which is Snakes in the Ganga, is also has the same mission of breaking India. But the players have changed, the funders have changed, the means have changed, and there is a force multiplier of sorts. And we really need to look at this as a really very critical point in the civilizational history of India, because there is no turning back after this. Now we call ourselves Vishwa Guru. All of Subramanya Bharati's work tells us that we perhaps were Vishwa Guru at one point. I would say Mahakavi Bharati would be extremely disappointed with all of us looking at the state, especially after you look at this civilizational audit that we have presented in the book. Now, so I want to quickly get into critical race theory and how it has come into India as critical caste theory, where race is being equated to caste and the effects of that on the ground. Now, as with any Marxist theory, it is all about power in society. The Americans essentially saw that different racial groups had different outcomes in various domains, had disparate, uneven outcome, even after the civil rights movement, which essentially, they said, means that racism is deliberately woven into the society. So, outcome of different racial groups in various domains is disparate even after the civil rights movement, and so what should we do about it? So they decided, this small group of people, this began in the legal, in Harvard actually, in the law school, where they said that they came up with this critical race theory where they said that the reason why we have different outcomes, even though we've tried to accommodate and make equal rights and access to the marginalized communities, which is essentially the blacks of America, there still seems to be a problem where the marginalized community is not doing well. And therefore, they decide that the reason for this is that the very DNA of social structures is racist. So what happens is they say that American society is fundamentally racist without recourse, and it's caused by white people who have white privilege. So they say that the white people who have privilege have designed these systems and institutions and society in such a way that whatever the blacks do, they can never come up. And hence, the answer to this essentially is that we dismantle the existing systems as they stand, because every incremental improvement for the blacks is not good enough. They are never going to get ahead because the system inherently, in its very DNA, is biased and is set up to ensure that the blacks fail. This obviously is not true, because you know how many Indians are there that are doing extremely well in that very same system. So it's not fair to take a broad brush like that and say that the entire American system is stacked up against the minorities, and it's structured in a way that privileges only white folks. And that's obviously not true in the results that we see. All of us have families overseas, and they all seem to be doing well in that system. Yes, there could be problems with bias here and there, and that could be addressed separately, but it is unfair to say that the entire American system is structurally biased and therefore needs to be dismantled. Now what has happened is that this critical race theory, which is saying that the system in fact is biased, says also that there are solutions, which is we dismantle the society and we come up with ways to ensure that there is equality of outcome and not equality of opportunity. So what they try to say is that when you give equality of opportunity, everybody is given equal opportunity. So maybe you have affirmative action, and in India you have quotas and all of that. So you're leveling the playing field. But that's somehow not good enough, because at the end of it, there are some people that are doing better. So they are getting better scores, they're getting better jobs, all of that. And so the outcome is not equal. And how do we make the outcome equal? So they say that the system itself is biased and we need to dismantle. Now, how do they go about doing the dismantling? For example, if you look at American universities now, they say it's test optional, in the sense they're doing away with entrance examinations altogether. So this is how the standards are being lowered, and this is to ensure that the outcome is the same. Gone are the days that we are looking for equal opportunity and making sure everybody gets a fair chance. Now the talk is, how do we make everybody have the same outcome? And if they don't have the same outcome, it means we take it from one person. This is a redistribution of resources. So you take it from one person and give it to someone else to make sure that the outcome is the same. And so this has far-reaching consequences within society. Now, critical race critical race theory claims that the privileged class, so be it Brahmins, men, whites, heterosexuals, have conspired to create structures in society that ensure their success is guaranteed. So in this case of India, when it becomes critical caste theory, you have the Savarna or the upper castes are scapegoated in Indian societies because they are considered to be the whites of Indian society. In Breaking India 1.0, Rajiv ji had talked about the Afro-Dalit project. And it was just starting then, 13 years ago, and now it's come full-fledged into this critical caste theory, because we really haven't done anything about that, and I'll show you examples of how it's entered Indian society with dangerous consequences. So So they say that every white person is a born oppressor, which means in the Indian context, every Brahmin is a born oppressor, regardless of what you did or did not do. The very fact that you are born as a Brahmin. So they use caste in this sort of surreal, different sense. And there's no free speech. They essentially want to silence anyone. If you stand up and say, actually, that's not fair, I may be a white or a Brahmin, but I really haven't done anything bad, you really have no chance to speak out, because the very fact that you are, from that background, a privileged background, you have, you essentially don't get airtime and you're cancelled. Your views don't matter. The lived experience of the marginalized is what gets currency. Now, what happens in America now is that it makes a society extremely divisive. It turns it into oppressor and oppressed. It glorifies victimhood, so everybody wants to be the victim. And this critical race theory has moved into other areas of gender, where the women are saying that patriarchy is essentially defining what is normal. So they're fighting family. Family is another structure that is that is passing on these kinds of ideas of patriarchy and hegemony from one generation to another. So we need to break the family. And of course, there is this whole debate on gender itself. The idea of gender itself is patriarchy. Who is to say who's a man and who's a woman? I can be a woman in the morning and man in the night. And these are something that society has imposed, and these structures also need to be broken. So what has happened is this critical race theory has come into India, and we say in the book that the people who are funding these are unfortunately the Indian billionaires. Now, where does this come? Where does this critical race theory become critical caste theory? Where does it originate? Harvard University, we say, is the nest of snakes, and in Harvard we look at 3 scholars and 1 activist. So we look at Suraj Yengade, we look at Ajanta Subramaniam, who wants to dismantle the IITs, and then we also look at Tenmuri Soundararajan and another black scholar by the name of Isabel Wilkerson. And we give rejoinders to what they have to say. So Suraj Yengade is a Dalit scholar who is a fellow at Harvard University. He is meticulously mapping the African American life and activism into the Dalit life and Dalit activism. So you have benign things like Dalit History Month, which mirrors the Black History Month, and you have Black Lives Matter, and now you have Dalit Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter now is not considered such a benign group anymore in the US because of their links to Antifa and other sort of local domestic terrorist organizations. You also have Dalit Panthers, which mirrors the Black Panthers. Black Panthers are known to be a terrorist organization in the US. Now, Suraj Yengade then goes on to telling Indian kids whose parents have paid $250,000 for an Ivy League education, saying how you should sever ties with your parents because they are passing on these casteist ideas from one generation and to the other, and the only way you can be an only way you can fight casteism is to be an anti-casteist. So there are only binary options here, that you are either a casteist or you're an anti-casteist, but you can never be a non-casteist, right? So what does an anti-casteist mean? An anti-casteist means that you become an ally. And what does allyship entail? Allyship means you have to actively take on the left's position. You have to go and you have to be an activist. You have to sever ties in your own circles from these kinds of ideas. So Suraj Jangde encourages children or young adults to sever ties with their parents, because that's how you be an anti-casteist. And you join part of the left's advocacy in fighting these kinds of casteist practices, according to him. So that is Suraj Jangde. And then you, of course, have Ajanta Subramaniam, who wants to dismantle the IITs. So Subramaniam uses critical race theory to formulate a thesis with no data, to support her wild claims. Her goal is to show that IITs and other institutions of excellence in India are oppressive structures designed to propagate the subjugation of Dalits and other marginalized communities by using merit as the criteria for success. So there is a big attack on meritocracy. We've come up with a book separately on that, which is called The Battle for the IITs. And we show there how merit is considered, caste capital, and merit is a sham. And the upper castes use merit to keep the Dalits and the other marginalized away from these kinds of eminent institutions. And this is important because you had the Supreme Court Chief Justice, Justice Chandrachud, recently say that merit cannot be reduced to narrow definitions of performance in an open competitive examination which only provides formal equality of opportunity. Earlier I talked about how the critical race theory talks about equality of outcome. Here is the justice who's talking about the same thing. Justice Chandrachud talks about substantive equality versus formal equality, which essentially means substantive equality means equality of outcome, whereas formal equality means everybody is the same under the law and everybody has equal opportunity. So Justice Chandrachud is now signaling that he is more interested in substantive equality, which means equality of outcome, which essentially means we redistribute resources, marks, whatever, from those who have to those we think are who are marginalized, and distribute them that way. And this is going to cause chaos. It's not enough for them to have quotas for entering the IITs. Now they want to make sure that they're going to do away with the exams altogether because the outcomes are not equal. So it's very important for us to understand these terms that social sciences puts out, because they affect us directly, affect our children directly, and affect the whole ecosystem. Now, with Ajanta Subramaniam's work of dismantling the IITs and calling caste as a form of capital that the upper castes use, and what they do is they go into the IITs like currency, you take rupees and convert it to dollars. They have something called caste capital, which they bring with them, these upper caste devious people, and they use the IITs to convert it, and then they have something called merit now, which is more fungible, that they can take abroad and go to America and act like they are also minorities, but then use this merit to get ahead in society. So there is the attack on the IITs from an institutional level, but there's also attacks on IIT alumni who are very successful in the Silicon Valley, and by calling them casteist and practicing caste bias in hiring. And this is evidenced by the recent case in Cisco Systems, where a Brahmin manager got sued for being biased and by a Dalit worker of some sort. I think he worked under him. And Cisco essentially said that we don't think that this was a caste bias case, but the case is still on and the jury is out there. So this has real impact on our people as they enter college, as they come out of college, as they enter workplace, and as they work in the workforce. So it has real tangible effect on people. Now, there's also this caste as a protected category is the latest in America. we had Seattle pass an ordinance saying that caste is a special protected category. You should understand that the after the civil rights movement, you had equal law protecting everybody, so there should be no discrimination, and that is enough to protect all kinds of biases. So the minute you have a protected class, anybody can say or sue a person saying that I got fired or I got rejected on any account because of caste bias. And these kinds of discrimination are taken very, very seriously in the US. Seattle has passed it. Many of the universities have made caste a protected class, and many of the companies are doing the same. And this is all coming back to India, because once the companies adopt it, they say Microsoft adopts caste as a protected category, then it comes back to their offshore offices in Bangalore or wherever, and it gets applied in India, on Indian soil, but critical race theory comes back to haunt you even over here. So my point is that we should take these social sciences very, very seriously, and because it affects us. And the time has come where it's affecting each and every one of us. Now, who's funding this research in Harvard? So you have the Mahindra Center for Humanities. So you have all these Indian billionaires who are making their money on Indian soil, and they lend their names for these centers at Harvard, which is producing this kind of caste, as a weaponizing caste in their scholarship, so to say. So you have the Mahindra Center of Humanities, you have the Lakshmi Mittal Center for South Asian Studies. In fact, there's a professor by the name of Thomas Hansen, who is called the Dhirubhai Ambani, Reliance Dhirubhai Ambani Professor of Anthropology at Stanford. And this Professor Hansen was one of the key pillars for the breaking Hindutva, dismantling global Hindutva conference, which took place last year. So these scholars of the West who are out to dismantle Hindutva and Hinduism are all funded by our Indian billionaires, which is very sad. Now, Harvard, I've mentioned Mahindra and Mittal, but there are so many others. They're just the anchor donors, and with that you have people like the head of Paytm has donated, Bajaj have donated, the Tatas have donated. So we just question these kinds of donations. So we say that we've done a civilizational audit, and the Indian billionaires have a right to fund these kinds of research, but we just want them to know that this is what the output that this kind of money is producing, that their money is producing under their family names, and is this what they want? And perhaps they do want this. So the second part of the book, we talk about Harvard, and we talk about all the this kind of atrocity literature that's coming out of Harvard. The third part of the book, of course, it talks about India, and we look at Kriya University, Ashoka University, and some other institutions and clubs like the Godrej Culture Labs and things like that. Now, if you look at Kriya University, Kriya has a partnership with MIT, and one would think that a partnership with MIT would give us space technology or nanotechnology or something like that, given that the partner is MIT. But unfortunately, MIT is coming here to again bring in social science. The Saudis have funded something called JPAL, Jameel Poverty Action Lab at MIT. Saudi Arabia itself has 1 in 4 that is below the poverty line, and yet they want to solve the poverty of India, which is ironic. Now, the Saudis have funded JPAL, and JPAL is an institution which is Poverty Action Lab under MIT, has a partnership with Kriya University, and of course they're looking at social issues, especially caste, in the field of economics. So, for example, there would be research on why Hindu women do not like to work once they have a family, because it's perhaps the Hindu men, Hindu upper caste men are patriarchs who forbid them from going to work, and they probably are oppressed, even more oppressed than poor Muslim women. You know, there is research like that. And of course there is Bill Gates, who funds this, who wants to change the behavior of Hindu upper caste women who are refusing to go to work because they want to take care of their family. Perhaps he has never thought that maybe Hindu women, have a choice and have made the choice to take care of their children. But he is working with Ashoka to change the behavior of Hindu women so that more of them can go to the workplace. Now, Kriya also is mining over 10,000 villages of Tamil Nadu, data from there, and they meticulously mine this, and the repository of this data is in Yale University for their research. So there's a whole lot of data mining that's going on all over in many aspects. Some of them our government gives. So for example, Niti Aayog has a partnership with Harvard for population studies, and India has given a key database on the population to Harvard University. Now, if you look at that population studies dashboard where they represent India, Kashmir is actually whited out. This is India given the data to Harvard. They have a partnership, and the map of India shows Kashmir whited out. And this is how Harvard looks at India. I don't know if our government also feels the same, but that's an important database has been given to Harvard by the Niti Aayog. Niti Aayog also has many of Harvard experts who come and give advice. In fact, one of them gives, talks about how we have an open one window to bring in foreign universities to Indian soil so that they can open shop. And we have a single window so that they can quickly register and get started with the business of educating Indians in liberal arts. Now, I'll come to that in a bit, but going back to Ashoka. So we studied 5 departments in Ashoka. The first one is, I'm just going to check the time, yeah. The first one is China Studies, where China is funding scholars through Harvard into Ashoka. Ashoka is the main conduit which distributes this scholarship. China essentially wants to train Indian scholars on how they should think about China. So you have Jadavpur University, Somaya College, Christ College, all these people who then send scholars through Ashoka into Harvard Yenching Institute, and then China trains them for a year on how Indian scholars should be studying China. So this is a national security issue as far as I'm concerned. And then you have the Gender Studies Department, and Ashoka proudly claims that we are the Harvard of India, as if it's something to be proud of, and says that Ashoka has the first one that not only has gender studies, but we also have gender and sexuality studies. So what does gender and sexuality mean? One would think that sexuality studies talks about abstinence and sexual health and things like that, but it's nothing to do with all of that. It has to do with how about bringing pornography into education? So they have these outside experts that bring in, that come up with these ideas saying that pornography should and must be a part of education. And these are experts that are being supplied to the NCERT. Now, the other experts they have are people who believe in deviant sexual practices and how young people should be exposed and should avail of these risky sexual behaviors because these the fact that we call them even deviant sexual practices is because of patriarchy. This is how critical race theory enters into the sexual domain. So who is to say that something is pleasurable and something is painful in sexual practice? This is an idea and a notion that is born of patriarchy, and that should be dismantled. And therefore, everything should be open, and we should encourage our young people to embark into risky sexual behavior. So this, I'm not making this up, right? So this is the sexual and gender studies and sexuality studies at Ashoka. And the third very, very disturbing institute in Ashoka is called the Trivedi Center for Political Data. It's not even political science. It's Trivedi Center for Political Data. It's a pure data mining operation. So you would be surprised to know, again, a national security issue. This is funded by the French Ministry of External Affairs. The French Ministry of External Affairs is funding this Trivedi Institute of Political Data. Now, what do? They have an ex-election commissioner, Mr. Qureshi, who is their chairman or whatever. And then you have Christophe Jaffrelot, who is he's a renowned Hindu phobe, and he's one of the, again, pillars of the Dismantling Hindutva Conference. And all they do is they collect data from every municipal panchayat election up to the legislative elections. Big and small, all election data they gather. They gather every candidate that has stood, the profile of every judge in every court. They know how many languages they speak, what is their income, where do they live. All data. And this is all residing in some overseas database in France and the University of Michigan. So the entire job of this Trivedi Institute of Political Data is to mine Indian data on the polity. And and where there are no translations, if it's in a local language, they have translated all of that as well, so that Western scholars can access them. Now this, you can easily create fault lines in India, and that's probably why you see all these, George Soros doing this or the BBC doing that. It's because these guys have this kind of a system that's going on. Now, there's another institute in Ashoka which is on philanthropy. Now, the clampdown on the FCRA has made the Western NGOs extremely frustrated. Not that they don't have other means to do it, but it's made them frustrated. So, Ashoka's philanthropy department, right? They are the consultants, if you will, that help these foreign NGOs navigate the new FCRA rules. So one of the concerns that they have is, how do you make the Indian donor give more? So in the world of philanthropy, you have two aspects, right? One is called rights philanthropy, for rights-based and advocacy-based philanthropy, and the other kind of philanthropy is essentially for services. And it seems that the average Indian donor is more concerned about services, which means healthcare, education, food. And what is concerning for Ashoka is, how do you convert this Indian donor that gives to services, of healthcare, education, and food, to make them more advocacy oriented? What should we do? How can we change their behavior? And how do we reduce the risk? So this is the kind of consulting that they're doing to Oxfam and Amnesty International and big NGOs. How do you change the behavior of the Indian donor? Now, one of the things they come up with is they say that Indian donors are perhaps not going into advocacy and human rights and all of that because they're a little afraid. It's too risky to be, political, so they rather stick with, building toilets and giving medicine. So one way to mitigate that risk is to have them pool their resources together. So if you're just one rich guy funding advocacy, you stand out like a sore thumb. And so instead what they do is you encourage your friends. And you can see that model implemented in this IPSMF, which is, you guys are in the media, you should know that, which is started by Azim Premji. Azim Premji started this, I forget the full thing, it's to fund media companies. And so you have Kiran Shaw and all the who's who is over there. Yeah, all the big guys, all the Indian big billionaires have formed a cooperative sort of institute, and then they pool their funds together. They pool their funds together and they fund media companies. So this is the state of, my time is up. So this is the state of affairs which Subramanya Bharati would be like deeply sad, and we should do something about it. I can go on about it. So the Snakes in the Ganga essentially talks about these problems. The part 4 of it, of course, talks about where all this is leading to. And there are global forces like the World Economic Forum and the UN, and which are essentially the mouthpieces for the billionaires, for them to take over our lives, the corporations, and the country. So the fault lines are there. They're deepening unless we wake up. So with that, I will close. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insightful speech on your book. Now I request Prafulya Ketkar to come over the stage and felicitate Srimati Vijaya Vishwanathan.